This is the first time we've ever done this, Zach.
I know. All right, here we go. Pressing button. We're online. Okay, 26 people, 36 people, 62, 140, 171, 292 people, 1,000 people, 1,800 people. We're live!
Destiny servers are live. This adventure has begun. It's awesome to have you here.
September 9, 2014. Destiny was unleashed onto the world, and it's safe to say that the world of video games has never been the same. To be brutally honest, the world of video games changes so rapidly that every few years we get one or two games which change the market forever. What makes Destiny a bit unique is that it continues to remain at the top of its subgenre, which can probably be defined as a shared world first-person looter shooter. Quite a few games have tried to replicate Destiny's success, but none of them succeeded at the same scale. Probably the only other game that comes close is Warframe, which actually came out before Destiny and has successfully survived for 11 years. But as a third-person character-based game, Warframe is in a league of its own. This video is my tribute to the Destiny franchise, which has played an important role in shaping my video game hobby. This is not a summary of Destiny's in-game story, so if you are looking for something like that, please consider visiting other channels like My Name is Bife or Mylin Games for a dedicated analysis of Destiny's 10-year story. This video is more of a highlight reel of playing a live service game over several years, dealing with the highs and lows that come with such a habit, and also talks about why I feel one needs to plan an exit point from such long-running games. The original script for this video was massive, running close to 20,000 words, and I was only halfway done. I wrote it over several days, tackling one year after another, and the memories simply kept pouring out. Eventually I realized that to talk about every year of Destiny in detail, I would need more than a month to write the script, and then probably another month or even more than that to edit footage from my collection consisting of 7 years worth of Destiny clips. Sadly, I realized this in early September, with mere days to go for the 10th anniversary of the game. So after consulting with a friend, who by the way I met online playing Destiny, I decided to first put out this relatively smaller video in time for the 10th anniversary, and I will tackle the multi-hour version some other time. This retrospective is limited by my personal experience with the franchise, and it is not meant to be exhaustive. There will be things missing along the way, especially from the sections talking about Destiny 1, because I only started playing Destiny 1 in its third year. Even for Destiny 2, you may find some minor stuff missing simply because I did not engage with the game during certain periods. If you think I have missed something important, please mention it in the comments for the benefit of other viewers. And since I have tried to cram 10 years worth of content into a single video of just over an hour, I could only manage to show footage of most activities for a few seconds. But hopefully, watching this collection of short clips will serve as a reminder of the variety of content Bungie has managed to deliver in 10 years. There are timestamps for each year included. Feel free to skip ahead to any particular section that you want. Otherwise, sit back and let us step into a Vex time gate and relive the journey once again. This is the first 10 years of Destiny. Before we get into year 1, let us take a minute to quickly remember how it all started. Any journey must have adequate preparation, and Bungie started preparing to embark on its ambitious 10-year journey a whole 7 years before the release of the first game. In 2007, Bungie announced that the studio was becoming independent by separating from its then parent company Microsoft Game Studios. As per the contract signed with Microsoft, Bungie needed to develop 2 more Halo games before doing their own thing. So the studio spent the next 3 years developing and launching Halo ODST and Halo Reach. On the side, however, early planning had started on the first Destiny game, which was teased as an image in Halo ODST through a poster that says Destiny Awaits. In 2010, Bungie signed a publishing contract with Activision, in which Bungie agreed to develop 4 Destiny games, scheduled to release once every 2 years starting in 2013. Each game was also supposed to have 1 major expansion in the year following its release. So the contract expected Bungie to release 4 Destiny games between 2013 and 2019 and 4 major expansions between 2014 and 2020. That was a really ambitious plan which we now know was impossible to execute. But in 2010, not many people had experience in running live service games. For context, even World of Warcraft was just 6 years old at that point, and we are now getting closer to its 20th anniversary. Destiny was never meant to be a full-scale MMO, so it was probably assumed that they would require a much shorter time to develop each game. However, Bungie quickly realized that they didn't have the time or resources to execute their vision, and the first Destiny game was delayed. Things were so bad that the story had to essentially be rebooted, with the entire thing being rewritten with less than a year to go for the game's launch. The game's systems and assets were already built, so the story had to be forcefully squeezed in to work with those systems. As a result, as the game approached launch, there was a lot of anxiety within the company due to the direction in which the game was going. There was a lot of uneasiness as the launch date came closer. At this point, the public was largely unaware of all these issues, and fans were eager to get their hands on Destiny. The general public was first given access via an alpha test in June 2014 and a beta test in July. Initial reception to both these tests was quite good because it was a small, curated experience. Players loved the gunplay and general aesthetic of the game, which holds strong even today. This led to great anticipation, and coupled with the highly publicized $500 million budget helping with the marketing, everyone expected Destiny to be a huge hit on day 1. And thus begins our journey with year 1 kicking off on September 9, 2014.
Guardian? Eyes up, Guardian.
It worked. You're alive. You don't know how long I've been looking for you.
Year 1 saw the launch of Destiny, the base game, and 2 expansions, The Dark Below and House of Wolves. Activision comfortably made back their $500 million and a nice profit in the first month of the game's launch, and this was despite the game not being available on PC. The critic reviews said that Destiny was a typical 7 out of 10 game, something that's more than decent but not quite great. But critics are always chasing their next game review and rarely spend enough time on the same game. Players knew that Destiny was something different. The launch wasn't great, the story didn't really make much sense, and the loot grind was tedious. But there was something definitely special here. The art was amazing, the gunplay was addictive, and the music was beautiful, even if the gameplay didn't always match up. Then there were the raids. In year 1, players got to experience the Vault of Glass and Crota's End. These 6-player activities proved that Bungie was still a studio that had some of the secret sauce which turned Halo into a monstrous hit. Destiny seemed to be on the same path to greatness, but it also seemed stuck. Something was pulling it back from being truly great. For every good feature that was introduced, something about it felt annoying and even like a waste of time. And soon after the first expansion came out, some players moved on to other games. The second expansion, House of Wolves, didn't feature a raid, but introduced a brand new PvP mode called Trials of Osiris, which launched the Twitch careers of dozens of streamers. This new mode gave players a difficult goal: win 7 PvP matches in a row without losing any, and as a reward you get to visit an exclusive social space called the Lighthouse and claim rewards that you couldn't get anywhere else in the game. Reaching the Lighthouse became the final goal for many people in the game who had done everything else. It was a matter of prestige, and some people didn't mind paying Twitch streamers or anyone else who would promise to help them. That brings us to the end of the first year of Destiny. It was the game that people loved to play, and also the game that people loved to hate. Behind the scenes, Bungie knew that their next expansion, The Taken King, had to deliver big, or else they might not have enough players to accompany them till the end of their 10-year journey. Year 2 had only one expansion and a free update simply called the April update. Let's talk about the expansion first. The Taken King came out on September 15, 2015, and it did what the community hoped it would. It saved Destiny. The Taken King was what the base game could have been had Bungie been given more time. There was a story that actually made sense. Players were asked to stop Oryx, the Taken King, who was seeking revenge for the death of his son, Crota. Players initially fought Oryx in the campaign, but he didn't really die. Then they had to go into the new raid, King's Fall, to finally put a stop to Oryx. King's Fall delivered something great. With 4 boss encounters and a couple of jumping puzzles, it was the most complex raid experience till that point. And the Oryx boss fight was unlike any other that players had seen. The sheer scale of it was amazing. Even better, the expansion didn't end there. After the raid, there were more quests to complete, more loot to collect, and then players discovered a secret mission that rewarded a new exotic weapon. The community was beyond happy with the quality of the Taken King. However, the expansion that saved Destiny also gave birth to something that would go on to harm Destiny in the long run. The introduction of the Eververse trading company, which brought microtransactions into the world of Destiny. Bungie assured players that the Eververse would not have any items that impacted core gameplay and that it would only be used to fund the live service operations of the game. The community was not convinced and still had some fears, which would come to life pretty soon. Later, the April update would add some minor quests as well as a lot of quality of life changes. However, it would also add loot boxes to the Eververse store called Sterling Treasures. The April update also came with the news that Bungie would release a new expansion for Destiny later in 2016 called The Rise of Iron, and that a full sequel would be released in 2017. This news kept the players excited enough to keep playing the game, knowing that more content was on its way. Sadly, at this point, Bungie bid farewell to a section of the Destiny community, namely those who played on the old PS3 and Xbox 360 consoles. Rise of Iron would not be releasing on those consoles since their hardware could no longer keep up with the industry's technical advancements. While unfortunate, this news was also exciting as players were eager to see what Bungie could do without being held back by the old consoles. And so the community bid farewell to Year 2 and looked forward to the future full of hope. Rise of Iron launched on September 20, 2016, marking the start of the end for Destiny 1. This would be the last expansion of any size that the original Destiny would receive, and fans were eager for it to be good. While it did not quite hit the high standards set by the Taken King, the general consensus was that Rise of Iron was a decent expansion. The limitations were clearly visible to everyone. A lot of the new areas and enemies were just remixed versions of existing assets, but the remix was done well enough to make them feel fresh. The new raid, Wrath of the Machine, was beaten in less than 2 hours and offered a lot more action set pieces than previous raids. Rise of Iron also remixed a few of the older strikes, adding new mechanics and enemy types. A new arena called the Archon's Forge was added, which allowed players to farm for endgame loot. There was also a special quest built around the infamous Gallarhorn weapon, where many players were finally able to get the weapon without having to depend on RNG. And after you did everything, that was pretty much it in terms of new Destiny content. Trials of Osiris kept people busy for a while, but everyone was eagerly waiting for news on the upcoming release of Destiny 2. However, Bungie had one last surprise left for players of the first game.
The greatest champions of the darkness have stood against you and been defeated. Face them once more. Teach them fear.
Similar to the April update for the Taken King, Rise of Iron got a March update, but instead of giving it a boring name, Bungie called it the Age of Triumph. It was meant to be a farewell event for Destiny 1, encouraging players to relive all the best activities of the game and earn new loot in the process. All 4 raids were tweaked slightly to make them more challenging, and if you emerged victorious, you would be rewarded with new armor sets with special effects, as well as the raid weapons at max level. Every week there would be a rotating set of quests and activities within each of the game's core activity types: story, strikes, crucible, prison of elders and raids. So players had a reason to log in each week and play a different set of activities, all of which would award loot at max level. For new players, it was a great time to catch up with everyone else. It was also during Year 3 that we got our first taste at Destiny 2. Sequel was revealed at a special event and players were able to try the beta soon after. Quite a few game systems were tweaked, so everything felt fresh and new again. It was certainly an exciting time to be a Destiny player, and all of us started to look forward to Year 4 or the first year of Destiny 2. From this point onward, it may seem like I'm rushing through the video even faster, simply because there's more content to talk about each year while still trying to not let this video run for multiple hours. Let's continue. Year 4 saw the launch of Destiny 2, which promised to offer an improved experience to existing players and offer new players a good entry point to the franchise. The honeymoon period was glorious. We got a lengthy campaign which, despite some unnecessary roadblocks, was a satisfying experience and was unlike any other Destiny campaign till that point. The endgame experience was also new, with a Nightfall that was actually tough and had a time limit, and a raid that, well, it looked really nice. Trials of Osiris was retired and we got Trials of the Nine instead, with a new 4v4 format and new game modes in the form of Countdown and Survival. After the honeymoon period ended, the endgame seemed like a flop. The Nightfall felt unfair when certain modifiers were active. The raid felt unrewarding because you mostly got tokens instead of actual loot drops, and Trials of the Nine was filled with teams that stuck together all the time, forcing the other team to do the same, leading to some very boring matches. The launch of the first expansion only seemed to make things worse. The campaign was very short and the only new strikes were 2 recycled campaign missions. Instead of a full raid, we got a shorter version called a raid lair, which, to be fair, was quite fun the first time. New PvP maps were locked to a separate playlist, effectively splitting the player base, and all hell broke loose with the first seasonal event, The Dawning, which came out a few days after the Curse of Osiris launched. Most of the good loot was locked behind the Eververse loot boxes. You couldn't earn the loot in-game and you could not buy it directly. You had to keep buying loot boxes with the hope of getting what you wanted. So community sentiment was at an all-time low. To fix things, Bungie invited a bunch of content creators to playtest the next expansion and provide feedback on how they could improve the game. The results of this effort were seen in the second expansion, Warmind, which still had a short campaign and a short raid lair, but the difficulty of the endgame was significantly ramped up. This angered the rest of the community, who did not like the spike in difficulty, and they even blamed the content creators directly. Since then, Bungie has tried to maintain a balance in the difficulty level of their content, and we have seen it go up and down over the years. The highlight of the season was the discovery of a secret exotic mission, the Whisper, which took the community by surprise and immediately boosted the morale within the player base. The mission itself was quite challenging and fun to play, and rewarded players with one of the best sniper rifles in the game, the Whisper of the Worm. Then came another surprise. Bungie revealed the upcoming expansion, Forsaken, by showing the depth of a beloved character, Kate 6. It was a good way to instantly drum up interest, but it also felt like a huge spoiler. All said and done, Year 4 or the first year of Destiny 2 came to a close with mixed emotions. On one hand, the community was curious to see what Forsaken would do to the game, and on the other hand, older players who had waited for 4 years for Destiny to reach its potential were worried that the day would never come. And then, the day arrived. To this day, I consider Forsaken to be the best expansion in the Destiny franchise, and Bungie was only able to pull this off because they had help from support studios provided by Activision, something that they don't have today. Forsaken was huge in every way. It had a good emotional story, an amazing raid which only 2 teams could beat within the first 24 hours, a separate destination called the Dreaming City designed exclusively to host endgame activities, and it also set up the story for the rest of the 10-year Destiny journey. If that was not enough, it introduced 2 new activity types. The first was a dungeon called the Shattered Throne, which was sort of a mini raid that you could complete solo or with a fire team of 3 people instead of 6.
Alright. Let's see what we've got. Cabal on the field.
The second was Gambit, a hybrid between a PvE and PvP game mode where you competed against an opposing team to defeat a boss while trying to slow down the other team. It was promising at first, but soon lost favor with the community due to a lack of meaningful updates and maps. Dungeons, on the other hand, continue to remain very popular to this day. Year 5 was also the first overhaul of the yearly content model and the next step in the integration of seasons into the game. 3 content packs or seasons were released throughout the year, each based on a separate theme. Black Armory revolved around obtaining powerful weapons by playing in arenas called Forges. This season is also notorious for releasing an activity called Niobe Labs, which was bugged at launch, meaning no one could beat it even after an entire day, until Bungie finally gave a hint to help the community finish the puzzle. Black Armory also included a raid called Scourge of the Past, which was around the size of a raid lair but was still called a full raid. It was the first raid experience to include a Sparrow section. Joker's Wild or Season of the Drifter unveiled Gambit Prime, the next version of Gambit, which brought some major changes to the format. It also included another activity called the Reckoning, which was very similar to a strike where you fight enemies along the way and then run into a boss. Due to the presence of these two activities, Joker's Wild did not include a raid. However, it did include another secret exotic mission called 0 Hour, which rewarded the Outbreak Perfected Pulse Rifle. While the community loved it, the mission did not receive nearly as much love as the Whisper mission in the previous year. The final season of Year 5 was Penumbra or Season of Opulence. It featured the first 6-person matchmate activity in Destiny called the Menagerie. It featured simple gameplay mechanics spread across multiple rounds and allowed players to target farm any piece of loot at the end. The activity was a huge hit with the community and would serve as the inspiration for similar activities in the future. Penumbra also included a new raid, Crown of Sorrow, once again taking place on the Leviathan ship. It was slightly larger than one of the raid lairs, but still not as big as a normal raid. All put together, I would say the 3 Year 5 raids were a much better set than the 3 Year 4 raid and raid lairs. Before we wrap up Year 5, it's important to highlight 2 important events. In January 2019, Bungie announced that it had bought the publishing rights to the Destiny franchise from Activision. Reports indicated that despite the community's positive response to Forsaken, Activision was not happy with the money Destiny was bringing in, and moreover, it was clear by now that the original contract of 4 Destiny games to be released by 2019 was impossible. So Activision walked out and Bungie was able to control when and how it would release all future Destiny content. And the first big change came in the form of the announcement that PC players would be migrated from Blizzard.net to Steam, starting with Year 6. The second important event, or rather announcement, was that starting in Year 6, Destiny would become a free-to-play game. All of Year 4's content would be completely free to all players, while all content from Year 5 onwards could be purchased as DLC. At the time of the announcement, it seemed like a good deal. New players could now enter the world of Destiny and immediately have access to a whole year's worth of content. However, we would soon learn that there is no such thing as a free game. Year 6 marked the first time that Bungie would launch an expansion as both the developer and the publisher. There was a lot to feel good about. The game was coming to Steam, it was going free to play, which would bring in a lot of new players, Bungie added cross-save so that players could freely share their progress across multiple platforms, and the community believed that without being bound by the limitations set by Activision, Destiny 2 would be a much better game. Year 6 would also mark the start of the next phase of the seasonal model. We would now get 4 dedicated seasons instead of 3, with the 4th one being tied to the expansion but would still have its own dedicated storyline. Let's start with Shadowkeep. The campaign was short, but also impactful. It hinted at the direction the story would take next by teasing the player's interaction with dark power. Instead of a new destination, we got a remixed destination in the form of the Moon, which first made an appearance in Destiny 1. The raid, called Garden of Salvation, had a kind of a buggy launch, but later the community would realize that, rather than bugs, it was the raid's tethering mechanic that a lot of players did not use properly. Regardless, the raid experience was not exactly smooth, and after getting the exotic weapon tied to it, many people never played it again. Personally, I enjoyed it, but it was a bit difficult to have a good session with a group of randoms. We also got a new dungeon, Pit of Heresy, which was quite good and was a highlight of the expansion. Then came the 4 seasons. This was Bungie's second attempt at designing a yearly content model, and they had given themselves an extra season to deliver as well. So the first big change they made was to not include any new raids throughout the year. Garden of Salvation was the only new raid in year 6, as opposed to the 3 raids we got per year in years 4 and 5. In exchange, we got another dungeon called Prophecy, which was offered free to all players. Then there were the seasonal activities. I'll run through them quickly and show the corresponding gameplay for a few seconds each. We had the Vex Offensive, the Sundial, Corridors of Time, which took 6 days to be solved, requiring a community-wide effort, Seraph Towers, Contact Events, and Interference Missions. If that was not enough, Year 6 also made several changes to the fundamental systems of the game. Grandmaster Nightfalls, Champions, the Armor 2.0 system, Finishers. It's fair to say that Year 6 brought a lot to the table, and if that was not already exhausting enough for the developers, the world suddenly had a pandemic to deal with. To no one's surprise, the next expansion was delayed and season of arrivals was extended. With the real world going through a lot of pain, many people relied on long-running games like Destiny to offer them the comfort of having something safe and familiar. Once again, before wrapping up the year, we need to talk about an important event that would change the game significantly, and this time it was not good news. Bungie announced the Destiny Content Vault, which would remove several activities and destinations from the game in order to make room for newer activities and replacements. Bungie's argument was that not doing so would mean the game's file size would become too huge and the company would require additional resources to keep supporting the older activities by testing them with the new sandbox changes. From the player's perspective, it felt like content being taken away, content for which a lot of them paid full price at launch. While all sorts of activities were going to be impacted, raids were probably the worst hit, with 5 raids scheduled to enter the vault, leaving only 3 raids in the game at the time of the new expansion's launch. But what angered players the most was the sunsetting system, which would make all old weapons and armor useless, as their power level would not go up when a new expansion launched. The reasoning for this was that Bungie wanted players to use the newly designed weapons and armor each year instead of using the same loadout for several years. The counter argument for this was that it was Bungie's responsibilities to make newer weapons and armor more meaningful to use over the older stuff. But by rendering the old loot obsolete, players were not being given any choice in the matter. With this negative mood, the community braced itself for the start of Year 7 while simultaneously battling with COVID in the real world. Beyond Light released as the next major expansion for Destiny 2 while also erasing a lot of the older content. Immediately, newer players faced a big problem. With none of the older campaigns being available in the game, they had no clue what was going on. With all currently available campaigns being locked behind a paywall, new players were utterly confused about how to progress in the game or what DLCs to buy. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them uninstalled the game on day 1. For older players, Beyond Light offered a decent campaign with a new subclass to play with. Stasis was introduced as the first Darkness subclass, a huge moment in the story of the game. However, it did not seem to have that big of an impact. Also, the fact that obtaining the full extent of the subclass required playing multiple weeks of time-locked content felt exhausting. Stasis itself did not feel as powerful as the older subclasses, but it was powerful enough to disrupt the PvP scene. Multiplayer matches were so broken that Bungie rushed to nerf some of the abilities granted by Stasis. The new raid Deepstone Crypt was a fun day 1 experience and soon turned out to be one of the easiest raids in Destiny 2 history. This was great because more players could enjoy a raiding experience than before. Deepstone Lullaby, a soothing track in the middle section of the raid, was particularly noteworthy. Realizing that players would not accept one raid per year for long, Bungie started re-releasing old Destiny 1 raids. This started in Season 14 with the launch of the Vault of Glass. The encounters were tweaked slightly to suit Destiny 2's sandbox, but apart from that, it was still the same raid as Destiny 1, offering the same loot, and it was still good fun. Next, let's talk about the seasons. This was the second year of Bungie's 4 seasons per year model, and fatigue was slowly starting to set in. Every season started to feel the same. Every week, the seasonal story would progress a little bit before grinding to a halt until next week, and players were then expected to play the seasonal activity over and over again to rank up vendor rewards. Occasionally there would be a second weekly story beat, but essentially it was the same routine every season. This year saw activities such as Wrathborn Hunts, Battlegrounds, Override, Expunge, Astral Alignment, Shattered Realm, and Presage. While editing the video, I realized that I was missing a lot of footage from this year's seasons, which is why I'm only showing whatever I have. It's important to note that all this content was being delivered by Bungie's staff while working from home. Running a live service game of this size while hundreds of employees work from home no doubt provided countless challenges. So, to absolutely no one's surprise, Bungie announced that for the second year in a row, the next major expansion was being delayed. This time, the delay would take the next expansion to the next calendar year. This meant that for the first time in Destiny history, we would go an entire calendar year without seeing a new expansion. That did not mean there would be no new content releases at all. Bungie put together a smaller DLC called the Bungie 30th Anniversary Pack and released it on December 7, 2021. For free players, it included a new 6-player matchmade activity called Layers of Eternity. For those who bought the premium version, there was a new dungeon called Grasp of Avarice, which offered the infamous Galahorn exotic rocket launcher as a reward. I do have to spend some time talking about Season 15 because it is notable for two reasons. One was that it came along with crossplay, a feature that the community had been waiting for ever since cross-save was implemented a while back. With cross-play, the Destiny community could finally play together regardless of which platform players were on. The second reason was that Season 15 finally introduced us to an important character in the Destiny universe, Savathun, the Witch Queen, sister of Oryx the Taken King. Interestingly, Savathun's character model was not ready at this point, so the artist resorted to hiding her character by encasing her in ice throughout the season. Just a few weeks before the end of Year 7, we received surprising news. Bungie had been acquired by Sony Interactive Entertainment for $3.6 billion. We would later learn that had this deal not been made, Bungie would have been in deep financial trouble. In early 2022, however, everyone assumed that it was Sony who was benefiting more from this deal because Destiny 2 seemed very much like a stable game, continuing to attract millions of players. As Year 7 drew to a close and the world slowly started getting back to work, the Destiny community was cautiously optimistic about the next expansion as it promised a fight with Savathun, something that we were waiting for since The Taken King released way back in 2015.
I saw the end before it happened. My own death, brought on by the separation from my power. And in these final moments, I looked to the sky. Hello, old friend. I've chased you for a long time. First as an enemy, then as a collector, and finally, now, a supplicant.
Let me start by saying this. The Witch Queen delivered a great campaign experience. There's no doubt about that. The higher difficulty Legendary campaign feature, which was inspired by Bungie's own Halo games, was an excellent fit for Destiny 2. Playing the Legendary campaign on day 1 was incredible, and put that together with the fact that the story was really of a high quality, and you can see why the Witch Queen's campaign is considered to be the best in the entire franchise by many people. The new Throne World destination had a mysterious atmosphere unlike other destinations we had explored till that point. The problem was, everything else apart from the campaign suffered from the same problem as previous years: fatigue. After beating the campaign, when players discovered that they faced another full year of the same endgame and seasonal model loop, they simply stopped playing. I remember cutting short my time with Destiny in this year. I only played the new raid WoW of the Disciple once and did not bother to get any of the raid loot. That's not to say it was bad. WoW of the Disciple turned out to be a really good raid with a final boss who went around kicking players for fun. And later, King's Fall from Destiny 1 would be launched as the reprised raid for the year. As for the rest of the year, it was again full of seasonal activities that each brought forward a different theme. This year's mix of themes was actually quite interesting, with the spooky nature of Season of the Haunted and the pirate theme of Season of Plunder being especially good. Let's quickly run through the seasonal activities. We had PsyOps Battlegrounds, the Vox Obscura Exotic Mission, Containment, Catch Crash, Expeditions, Heist Battlegrounds, and another exotic mission, Operation Seraph's Shield. Apart from these, we also saw the introduction of the dungeon key system, where players would get 2 dungeons guaranteed per year, but they either had to be purchased separately or would be made available as part of the annual seasonal bundle. If you simply bought the base edition of the yearly expansion, you would have to pay separately for the 2 dungeons. The 2 dungeons released this year were Duality and Spire of the Watcher. They were both of good quality without doubt, but I am not sure if I would have paid for them separately if I had already not purchased the annual seasonal bundle. The introduction of the dungeon keys, along with the growing size of the Eververse store, began to make the dedicated players feel uneasy. The general feeling was that the players' time was not being respected, and that the loot available in the Eververse store was better in quality and quantity compared to the loot available in-game. The community was not sure who to blame. The Eververse store seemed to grow regardless of who was in charge, Activision, Bungie, or Sony. The yearly showcase to reveal the next expansion was met with muted response, especially because Bungie had originally meant for this next expansion to be the last one in the 10-year story, but then they announced that they would need another expansion to wrap up the story. So this upcoming expansion, titled Lightfall, was viewed suspiciously by the community, who felt that it existed only for Bungie to avoid having to take a gap year and lose the revenue it usually gets with expansion launches. We still don't know for sure in what shape Lightfall would have been if it had been released as the final expansion as originally planned, but we do know that Year 9 was always destined to be rough. Despite the community being a bit worried, Lightfall launched on February 28, 2023 to great anticipation. After all, this was the follow-up to The Witch Queen, which had delivered the best campaign experience in Destiny history. The legendary campaign was making a comeback, and players also had a new subclass, Strand, to play with. So players jumped into the expansion in great numbers on day 1, with Steam alone clocking in at 316,651 simultaneous players, the peak player record for the entire game, which still holds today. And it was a flop. The campaign had not flopped this hard since the early days of Destiny 1. Lightfall's story made very little sense. In fact, it was widely acknowledged that if you put the opening cutscene and the ending cutscene together, you could still follow the entire story of Lightfall, making everything in between feel unnecessary. Lightfall's focus on the Strand subclass put the actual story on the back burner, and even though the gameplay was enjoyable, with Strand adding a whole new way to play the game, the campaign itself received harsh reviews from critics and players alike. And to make things worse, the new raid, Root of Nightmares, turned out to be relatively easier compared to other recent raids, and unfortunately this was interpreted as a negative thing by the community, which felt that Bungie had lost its focus even while designing raids, which are meant to be quite challenging. This aspect was slightly improved when the reprised raid was revealed to be Crota's End, arguably the easiest raid in Destiny 1, but in its reprised form, it gave players just the challenge they were looking for. The two new dungeons, Ghosts of the Deep and Warlord's Ruin, also provided a good experience overall, although they were more challenging to play solo compared to the previous dungeons. On the whole, player sentiment kept dropping throughout Year 9, which is a pity because the 4 seasons delivered this year were actually trying to offer something new to players. The seasonal activities this time around were Defined Battlegrounds, Salvage, Deep Dives, Altars of Summoning, Savathun's Spire, Revenge Slayer, and The Coil. Each of these missions offered a new experience to Destiny, like introducing a rogue light mode, a deck builder feature, an endless mode, and so on. A lot of regular players have remarked that this set of 4 seasons was Destiny 2's strongest ever. Sadly, while the content was good, the story outside the game was starting to get sour. In October 2023, Bungie announced mass layoffs, firing over 100 employees, including several seniors. A leak suggested that management had reportedly ignored employees' suggestions to make changes to the game based on player feedback, and when Lightfall did not meet sales targets, layoffs seemed to be the path chosen by management to save money instead of pursuing other methods to cut costs. This news was met with great anger from the community, who were upset not only about the layoffs but also at the news that their feedback was actively being ignored by the management. Soon after the layoffs, Bungie announced that the next expansion, The Final Shape, would be delayed, and a free update called Into the Light would be released to bridge the huge gap between Season 23 and the next expansion. Speaking of Season 23, it was not only going to become the longest Destiny 2 season ever, clocking in at 189 days, but it would also be the last season of Destiny 2. Bungie announced that after the release of The Final Shape, the seasonal model would be retired and we would instead start a new model called Episodes. We'll talk more about them later. Now, let's talk briefly about Into the Light. For a free update, it was received very well. It brought back the Whisper and 0-hour exotic missions, and a new Horde mode activity called Onslaught, which was also a hit. Best of all, it introduced a limited time event called Pantheon, which was a boss rush raid event. Each week, players were tasked to fight an increasingly larger list of raid bosses back to back, and in return, they would get a guaranteed exotic weapon drop as well as progress towards a prestigious title.
I know you'll use this well. Fight well.
Pushing back buys us only time, but the alternative is unthinkable.
I can't wait to see what you do with that. Magnificent.
Into the Light made players feel like their feedback was finally heard and Bungie was starting to make some good decisions. We cheered when Bungie reversed their controversial sunsetting decision and announced that any old gear that players had saved would work at the maximum power level from year 10 onwards. Bungie successfully managed to change the mood around the game, and we marched with a hint of optimism towards the final leg of our journey. Due to multiple delays and how Bungie counts Destiny's calendar based on the release dates of expansions, we are still in the early days of year 10, when we should actually have been wrapping up year 10 by now. However, we do have a fair idea of what to expect from the rest of year 10, and that's what I'll mention in this section. But first, let's talk about the final shape. I liked the final shape, and so did a lot of other people. But I guess we liked it more so because it gave us a really heartfelt, emotional ending and not because of the rest of its story. Let me explain. The first half of the final shape tasks us with reuniting the Vanguard leadership who have scattered across the different regions of the Pale Heart map. This is very similar to the story of Destiny 2's base game, where we had to travel to various planets to reunite the Vanguard leadership. And once we did get everyone together, there was only a brief fight with the main villain, the Witness. Now I agree that the fight was quite interesting, but it was a bit too short. The main fight with the Witness was in the new raid Salvation's Edge, which was so tough on day 1 that only one fire team was able to finish it, that too after fighting for nearly 19 hours straight. To Bungie's credit, the Witness did not die in the raid either. Instead, there was a special 12-person activity called Excision, where 12 Guardians fought together to finally defeat the Witness once and for all. It was a really well-designed fight which even gave a taste of the final raid encounter for people who could not or would not play the raid. And after this fight followed a series of cutscenes that served as a fitting farewell to a 10-year story. There wasn't anything surprising, but it was executed really well. And this is why I guess a lot of people love the final shape, for those last few cutscenes. I love them as well, but I would have perhaps preferred a campaign that was focused more on us fighting the Witness rather than chasing our lost fire team. Anyway, that was it for me, my stepping off point. Sure, we were still at the start of a whole new year of Destiny content, but I had had enough. 1 week after the expansion came out, I took a break from playing Destiny 2. It's been 3 months since then, and I still have not gone back, which is why I only have trailer footage to show for the rest of this section. Let us now spend a bit of time looking at what's going on with the game. As mentioned before, the seasonal model has been retired and has been replaced with episodes. These are essentially longer seasons split into 3 acts. Each act runs for 6 weeks but only has 3 weeks worth of content, with the other 3 weeks meant for players to catch up. The first episode has so far shown us that apart from a change in name, not much has changed with the seasonal model. Already, Bungie has announced a change for the next episode where all the content in each act of that episode will be released on day 1 instead of following the old weekly routine. I got episode 1 included as part of my purchase of the final shape, so I will play it once all of its content has been released. But I'm not sure if I want to purchase the other episodes or if I will invest any more money into Destiny 2. I believe every long-running game should have a stepping off point because there are simply too many good games out there for us to keep spending time on only one game forever. There are other factors to consider as well. On July 31, 2024, another round of layoffs were announced at Bungie. This time around 220 jobs were lost. Some of them were actually saved by being moved to other studios under Sony's umbrella, but they were no longer Bungie employees and would no longer work on Destiny. After learning of this news, I did feel bad that despite having the support of millions of players all these years, Bungie leadership had been unable to build a sustainable business model. With leaks suggesting that there may not be any more expansion-sized DLCs for Destiny 2 in the future, I see little incentive for players to keep investing into this game. Episodes 2 and 3 are not out yet, but we do know that they will feature content similar to the seasonal models. They will of course have different areas to explore, and episode 3 in particular is looking to be a bit interesting with the return of the Dreadnought area from Destiny 1. But in the end, it is just more Destiny. And after 10 years, I think we've had enough Destiny. While it doesn't make business sense to shut down the game, it would be a sign of respect to the community and the former employees of Bungie if the company just picked a good storyline and brought the game to a close. To put it another way, this video is titled Destiny the First 10 Years, but I honestly don't have the stamina to hop on to the next 10-year journey. There's a lot I haven't talked about in this video. I barely touched upon the seasonal events that come by every year. The Guardian Games, Solstice, Festival of the Lost, and the Dawning. I haven't talked about the Iron Banner, an event that no one likes but still plays every time it comes around. I haven't mentioned the many bugs and glitches that led to some fun times in the game, like the laser tag weekend where Prometheus lens melted everyone in PvP, or the time when we could have 12-man raids by exploiting a fireteam glitch, or the craftening where we could craft overpowered weapons, and we haven't even talked about the almighty Telesto. Like I said at the start, 10 years is a long time and it is going to take several weeks to fully write down all the various events and drama that took place inside and outside of the game. I still want to do that someday, but for now, I'm happy with the things I highlighted in this video. It's been a wild journey, and even though I was only part of it for 7 years personally, I am glad that I got to experience it. I don't have much to say in closing, except that even though I don't plan on playing a lot of Destiny going forward, I will always remember and cherish the years I spent playing these two games. So taking inspiration from Bungie themselves, I will let the rest of this video play out with that feel-good track after all this time, with some of my favorite moments of playing this flawed but amazing franchise. Thanks for watching and see you Starside.
Whether we wanted it or not, we've stepped into a war with the Cabal on Mars. So let's get to taking out their command, one by one. Valus Ta'arik. From what I can gather, he commands the siege dancers from an Imperial land tank outside of Rubicon. He's well protected. But with the right team, we can punch through those defenses, take this beast out, and break their grip on Freehold.